Hello, and welcome to another episode of Climbing on the Bookshelf. This time I'm talking with big wall innovator, visionary and climber John Middendorf. In the 1980s, Middendorf climbed some of the hardest walls in Yosemite and Zion, and in 92 he climbed one of the largest rock walls in the world, Great Trango Tower in Pakistan. In Flagstaff, Arizona, he developed, with his A5 team, the best portaledges in the world. The design is still being used and developed to this day. He's committed many years into researching history of tools and techniques of climbing and has now produced 2 comprehensive volumes of early climbing tools and techniques. The 2 volumes are called Mechanical Advantage, Tools for the Wild Vertical. Volume 1 mostly covers European tools and techniques up to the 1930s, and Volume 2 is mostly North American tools and techniques up to the 1950s. If you're really into climbing and research on climbing tools and gear history, head over to bigwalls.net or bigwallgear.com or even his YouTube channel after you've listened and check out all his research and climbing pages. It's an amazing site. You could be there for hours reading his stuff. He has his cliff notes and lists of ascents he's done, sketches and ideas for the portaledge and that sort of stuff, and there's also links on where to get his volumes from. You could easily waste a day just on those 2 sites. I'd like to say a massive thank you to John for giving up his precious time to talk with me, as I caught up with him just before he was about to go and do a talk in a friend's climbing gym in Flagstaff, and also a multi-day kayak down the Grand Canyon, family in tow. I was really excited to chat with him, and I hope you learn as much as I did once you've listened. I've broken our chat into 2 episodes. I'll release episode 2 in a week or so. This one mainly covers the portaledge stuff, and the other episode, his new volumes, Mechanical Advantage, Tools for the Wild Vertical. If you've not listened to his episode on the Enormocast back in 2017, go and check that episode out too. Just to remind you that you can pick up John's new volumes from Blurb.com, and there's links on where to get them on bigwallgear.com and bigwalls.net. Hope you enjoy this one.
Hello.
Hello, John.
Hi, Stuart. How are you?
How are you? Very well, thank you. And you?
Good. Yeah, very good.
Good. It all connected well, and it was quite straightforward, is that?
Yeah, I downloaded the app and it seemed to work a little better. Yeah.
Oh, nice. Excellent. So how are you? Are you all right?
Good. Yeah. Here in Ohio, in the U.S., we normally live in Tazi, but we're here visiting family. And this morning I've been listening to some of your podcasts with Katie.
Oh, great. Thank you. Yeah, thanks for that. Thanks. I really appreciate that. So you all set up? Have you got a drink with you and all that sort of stuff? And
it's good timing because I've actually I haven't done a slideshow for decades really, but I'm doing one next week in Flagstaff because we're going there for a Grand Canyon River trip.
Oh, nice!
And I thought I'd do one at the gym there, which was built by a friend of mine and Stan Mish, and so it's good timing. I'm kind of reflecting on all these all my old stuff.
All your old stuff. So yeah, that's great. That's great.
Great.
So how's the weather over there? Is it all right?
It's rainy here in Ohio right now.
Oh,
and it was very hot the other day.
Okay.
But yeah, we usually spend a week here visiting my wife Jenny's family, and it's Ohio's actually quite a nice place, really.
We're in the UK. We're in the south. I'm in the southeast of the UK.
Southeast.
Towards the coast, pretty close to the coast, within a sort of maybe 45 minutes drive to the coast, south coast.
Wales or?
No, the south coast of England.
Southeast,
so southeast. Yeah. And at the moment we're having a bit of a heat wave. The last sort of maybe I'd say 4 or 5 weeks. I think it's probably rained maybe 2 days, and it's been in the sort of mid 25 degrees Celsius. So I reckon that's sort of 75 degrees plus. For a while now. It's
that's hot for UK.
It is for the UK, yeah. So things are going well, really. I mean, the weather's nice. I mean, getting outside and doing stuff, and it's not like you're stuck in the house because it's pouring down with rain or it's cold, which is what's usually like in summer in Britain. So
one time I went to Stony Middleton, and Derek Hersey had told me to go there, and I hitchhiked there when I was a teenager. And it rained about 2 out of 3 days. And one of the locals who was climbing there with me, he's like, "This is the best summer ever."
Okay, it's been sunny for like a couple of days, and that's it.
Yeah.
Oh, excellent. So, if you don't mind, we'll crack on if that's all right.
Sounds great.
John Middendorf, welcome to Climbing on the Bookshelf.
Thank you, Stuart. Appreciate you inviting me.
I'd like to start, if that's okay, about you talking about your early life and where you grew up. For the people that don't know or haven't heard about you, I'm pretty sure everybody has in the climbing world, and where you first started to go out in the outdoors and when you first noticed climbing.
Sounds good. Yeah, when I was 14 years old, my mom decided that I was getting in too much trouble being a young teenager during the summer, not much to do. And so a cousin of ours had gone to a mountaineering school in Colorado called Telluride Mountaineering School. And so she sent me out to that. And 14 was like the minimum age you could go. And it was a tough program. I later did some programs with Knowles. And when I think back on what they were putting us through at the Telluride Mountaineering School, it was tough. You know, the first morning you got there, you did calisthenics before the sun rose, and then ran up about a mile and a half up to this lake that was just above freezing. Yeah, so that was the introduction, and then for about 5 weeks, we would just do these 1 week to 9-day tours around the Colorado San Juan Mountains, and mostly backpacking with heavy loads, but a lot of climbing too. One of the objectives was, I think it's the Needles Range. We would go in there, and there'd be lots of rock climbs that were moderate climbing, maybe 5.2 or 5.3. And we would just have a rope, really. Maybe a rope, a couple slings, and maybe a few carabiners. But basically, that was the style of climbing I learned how to climb on, these big, long rock ridges where you're finding natural blaze, you're tying in with a bullet on a coil, you're belaying each other safely, and often having to rappel off with a body rappel. So that was my first year of climbing, was exploring the Colorado San Juan Mountains with very simple equipment, basically, but yet doing very wild exposure and pretty amazing climbs, really. And then I thought that was it, really. But then I met a friend of mine in high school, John Ely, and he was keen to climb. And so we started climbing at this local crag in Washington, D.C., called Carter Rock. And Carter Rock's sort of maybe 15 to 20 meters high at the most. But it's got lots of technical sort of bouldery climbing, face climbing mostly, a few cracks. And so we'd go there in top rope whenever we could get a ride from one of our parents. This was in grade, 10th grade. And
so this is before you could drive yourself there?
Yeah, when a teenager having their own car back then was pretty rare. So we basically were able to build our skills up to about 5'9", 5'10" level just by top roping these thin climbs.
Yeah, so what sort of year was this? What, in the 70s was it, I guess?
So yeah, that the gear is kind of the cusp of the the clean climbing revolution. There were still climbers there who were hammering in pitons, but we had read Roll Robbins's basic and advanced rockcraft, and he was a proponent of the whole clean climbing, and he talked about how he learned about it in Britain, in fact, and so that's who we were too. We were clean climbers. Pitons were the old style, and we were going to climb clean with these nuts, and basically back then you had the hexes from Chenard, and peck crackers were around, these round nuts that were sometimes fit somewhere. And then you had stoppers, basically. And Forrest had come out with Tetons, and there were also these Kraken ups. And so, but basically the Tetons were we never seemed to figure out how to use those, really. And the Kraken ups we would use, these were clean climbing hooks, that you could put into thin cracks, but mostly just stoppers, and even the carabiners, there were aluminum carabiners, of course. They go back to before World War II, but cheaper carabiners were steel. So a lot of our carabiners were steel. We had gold line ropes, which were a braided rope, or I'm sorry, a 3-ply rope that was pretty stiff, and nylon rope, and really stretchy rope. And so that was basically our gear for our first few years of climbing.
Wow.
There were pro-on ropes, but everything was quite expensive, really. We were all
sure. Were there any sort of near misses or accidents that kind of put you off from you climbing?
Probably, yeah. I think there were, but that was sort of like how we viewed climbing. We'd read all the classic literature of the Walter Bonatti, and so really climbing was like you get yourself in a situation where you're pushing your limits and you're having a big epic. That was that was kind of the goal.
It's up to you to get yourself out of it.
Yeah, and so after a couple of years of that, we had seen this cover of National Geographic where it was Galen Rowell and team had done the first clean ascent of Half Dome. I think that was 75. And so in 1977, my friend John Ely and I, we borrowed my sister's car. I think he had just gotten his license, and we drove out to Yosemite and we climbed Half Dome, just like we had seen in the National Geographic. And we climbed it all clean and
proper adventure.
Oh, it was fantastic. Yeah, it was just mind blowing to be able to be up there and for me that's what climbing was all about. We needed to get our skills, our free climbing skills solid, but really it was about climbing those big faces. That's always what appealed to me, and so everything was about training to climb.
Sure. From when you first went to Yosemite and borrowed your friend's sister's car, what was it like the drive into Yosemite, and how did that? Is that the first time that you'd seen it, or obviously I think you might have seen it in magazines or whatever, and was it as awe-inspiring as everyone says it is the first time you see it?
Absolutely, and it's still awe-inspiring every time I drive in. I always try going through 140 to just get that view when you come out of the tunnel. It's so amazing, and every time I go there, it's always that way. So it was just as inspiring for the first time. Probably scary too, because we knew we were going to try some of these big walls.
And you put up quite a few first ascents as well over your time there.
Yeah,
which is impressive. I mean, I've had a look at your resume, I guess. Yeah, and some of the stuff that you've done is mind-boggling at the time that you were doing it as well.
Well, I think after getting this first experience as a teenager, then I never really thought I would become a climber. I thought it was just going to be something I did as a hobby, and then I was really focused on becoming an engineer, basically. So I studied hard in high school, and I went to good universities, but through university, I was always climbing, and climbing was definitely a passion. When I graduated with a Bachelor of Science in Mechanical Engineering from Stanford in 1983, I actually sold all my climbing gear, and I'd done a few walls by that time. I think I had been halfway up the Shield. I'd done the nose. I'd done the South A. I climbed the Zodiac. By that time, but basically just a few of the sort of moderate walls, and so I was, in 1983. I was like, okay, that was fun. Now it's time to become an engineer and get real with my life
and have responsibility. Yes.
And I had an interview and a job offer out in Ohio, here exactly where my wife is from.
Oh, wow. Okay.
We didn't meet until 40 years later, and so I bought a motorcycle, a BMW R60/5, an older one, and I was going to just do my last tour. And so everything I owned was in my saddlebags. I did keep a pair of climbing shoes and a chalk bag because I love bouldering. And I started off on my journey to drive cross country, but I thought on the way I would go via Yosemite and just see it one more time to the Midwest. And I ended up meeting Border Braun, who was working on the rescue team there, and who lived there for decades and decades. He just recently moved away, but and he invited me on the rescue team. He said, "Hey, we need another member on the rescue team. It's winter." And so the next thing you know, I'm on the Yosemite rescue team, climbing every day with Warner and a lot of other great people there. And but still, that passion for me was like climbing the walls. And at the time, this was 1984 now. At the time, it was really mostly, the focus was really on long, bold free climbs, which I also did. I mean, I climbed Astroman 7 times, and I loved climbing these long free routes, but that was never my sort of desire to just be a long free climber. It was more about these big impossible walls. And so I just started climbing El Cap lots, and probably, 10 times a year. And then eventually I got to the point where I figured I could do new routes on El Cap. And so I learned how to scope out the new lines, and, I could tell I knew where the routes went, and learned how to, in the morning, look at it with a telescope or binoculars, and then, see if you could map it out, and then also look at the evening light and try to figure out what was up there and if it was possibly climbable.
So was it completely different to when you scoped it out and had a look to when you were actually physically there? Was there anything that stuck out and you thought, well, I don't remember seeing this?
Well, you learn by experience, but the reason why you create these complete maps on the ground is because you might be up there in a thin seam and it blanks out, and there's a bulge to your right that you can't see around the corner. But if you refer back to the map you made back on the ground, you know there might be a good feature there that can be accessed and climbed. Okay. So the whole idea of swinging around up there and that was like, that was it for me. Like, just being able to go up there and climb these routes, using minimum of bolts, and just trying to naturally use features that were on the wall.
So how long were these ascents taking you? Were they multi-day things, or were they a one day?
Oh, they were all multi-day. That was it. To climb these technical aid routes on El Cap, they required days and days. Sometimes I think the longest I ever spent was 10 days on a new route. But also, I was getting good at climbing fast too. Like, I think I did the 8th or 9th one day ascent of the nose during those years. One day, 10 hours and a half or so.
Nice.
So, it's about climbing efficiently, really. And so to climb, a route like even Mescalito or Pacific Ocean Wall, which were still considered hard test pieces back then, like climbing them, anybody could really climb them in 10 days. But, the idea was to be as efficient as possible, work hard each day, have a long day, get up early, and climb them in fast times, really. Because really, also Yvon Chouinard's adage that he wrote in the American Alpine Journal in the 60s, he wrote about how Yosemite was the training ground for the greater ranges. And so at that point, I was starting to think about the greater ranges, like, okay, well, these are skills I'm learning and becoming accomplished at, and maybe one day I'll be good enough to go to the greater ranges and test my skills, which did end up happening. But so really, it's like moving fast and efficiently was part of the game, and being bold, really, and trying to that involves being bolder than it would if you just want to take your time and make sure every placement is 100% perfect. And so
great. So what was the main greater range? What was your first experience on one of the greater ranges? Because I know that you've climbed Great Trango Tower. Back as in the Karakoram. That wasn't your first?
I went to Baffin Island in 1986. Okay. And we went in the winter. It was on the edge of the season of winter, because we were concerned about how we were going to get up the valley, and so we went up when the river that cuts through there was still frozen, so we could take snowmobiles up. I think it was like March, perhaps. But when we got up, we were going to do a new route on Asgard. We got about 6 or 7 pitches up, but it was just so cold. It was so cold that you could actually melt water, fill up your water bottle, hang it on the inside your portal edge, and just watch it crystallize in like 15
just before your eyes. Yes.
Yeah. It must have been 50 or 60 below, because later we hiked out, and I remember in one of the huts, which had a thermometer, I walked out to use the natural bathroom, and the temperature said -45, and it felt balmy to me. I was and so we'd just been in this incredible cold snap, perhaps, but that we failed because of that. And so after that, I well, I wasn't really sure what I was going to do, but the transition for me was actually basically feeling like big walls were that was where I wanted to go. But then in 1986, I also got hit by a big storm on the south face of Half Dome. And we went up there with state-of-the-art equipment. You know, we had the best portaledges that were being made at the time, and synthetic bags. But we went up there and we got caught in one of Yosemite's worst storms. I guess there were tornadoes down in Merced and crazy wind on that south face of Half Dome. It's the backside of Half Dome. It's in Little Yosemite Valley, and basically in Little Yosemite Valley, when there's a storm, that whole valley just turns into a Venturi wind tunnel. And so we were getting just hammered by cold rain and huge winds. And then at night, everything started to freeze. So we're completely saturated by the storm. But what happened is we had these three one-person portaledges. I was up there with Mike Corbett and Steve Bosky, and the portaledges just couldn't withstand that kind of condition. The wind was just smacking them around the wall, and also the snow that was loading them just exceeded their tensile strength, essentially. And one of them collapsed, and they were all just barely hanging in there.
Wow. Okay.
So we needed a rescue, and we got rescued by the Lemoore Navy base, and we got plucked off by a helicopter. And after that, I actually was pretty humbled, I'd say. Because up to that point, I felt like anything was possible. I could do anything, on these big walls and survive anything and suffer through any conditions. Yeah. But after nearly dying on that wall, I decided to take a break.
Sure, okay.
And so then that's where I went to Flagstaff. I moved to Flagstaff because of the good climbing there, and I started a business called A5 Adventures.
We'll now take a quick break and get back to the show after this ad. Are you tired of drinking your morning coffee out of boring plain mugs? Look no further than Climbing on the Bookshelf podcast mugs. The mugs are designed with the avid climber in mind. With the show's unique design, you can show off your love for climbing literature and the podcast at the same time. Whether you're sitting down and listening to Climbing on the Bookshelf, a pro climber, or just starting out, the mugs are a perfect addition to your collection of climbing gear. But wait! Are you looking for more ways to show your love of climbing for your favourite climbing literature podcast? Look no further than our exclusive Climbing on the Bookshelf unisex t-shirt. Not only does the unisex t-shirt look great with the show's logo, they're also incredibly comfortable to wear. The unisex t-shirt is perfect for any climbing activity, whether you're hiking to the crag or just lounging around waiting for your turn at the climbing gym to send your next proj. With different colours and sizes available, you'll look great even when you're sitting down and reading a mountain literature book, of course. How about a Climbing on the Bookshelf tote bag? This is the perfect accessory for carrying some of your climbing gear. You can even use it for non-climbing related shopping outings too. But why would you do that? You could put your groceries in it, put a picnic in it, maybe even that new mountain literature book or guide that you've been hankering after in your local bookshop. So, if you're a fan of climbing literature and love listening to Climbing on the Bookshelf, don't wait any longer to get your hands on our exclusive Climbing on the Bookshelf mugs, unisex t-shirt and tote bag. Did you get the message that the t-shirt is unisex? Or did I overdo it a bit? Order now and show the world your love for climbing and your favourite climbing literature podcast. See the link in the show notes or head over to Instagram @ClimbBookshelf where there's a link in the bio. Happy climbing, and now back to the show.
And my first product was a hammer, big wall hammer that hadn't been made for a long time. Nobody was really making a good hammer for big walls for putting in pitons. And so I made a hammer, got it forged with Ajax Forge in Los Angeles. There's a lot of finish work on those. So I set up a shop and started making those. And then I started working with Kyle Copeland, actually, who had already set up a few sewing businesses. And back then in the mid-'80s, it was a different commercial scene then. There's a lot of really innovative makers all over the place, San Diego and California, East Coast, making gear for climbing, harnesses and
okay.
Everything you can imagine for climbing was you usually bought it from these small companies rather than Black Diamond or
sure. Yeah.
But you the gear, and you'd have people like Dick Silly, who was walking around parking lots in Joshua Tree, and just rack full of like harnesses and chalk bags, and so you bought your gear locally, from other climbers who were making gear, and so I joined that contingent.
Okay.
Of Business A5, and so Kyle Copeland joined up with me, and he taught me how to sew. Basically, he knew all about how to build a sewing table and what kind of sewing machines to buy, and so I got set up with that, and then started designing and making a better portaledge.
So that experience on Half Dome was that your inspiration to make the portaledge better?
Absolutely. I realized like that's the limitation. If you're going to do
stormproof, rather,
if you're going to do El Cap wall in a remote in the greater ranges, you're going to get conditions like that, and that it's just impossible. And basically, up to that point, really, when you look at all the big walls that had been done, I mean, they'd either been done alpine style or with a lot of fixed ropes, or they had really good natural ledges. But it was clear that there were a lot of walls out there that had incredible, or they were just incredibly good sufferers, like Charlie Porter on Asgard, for 7 days or something. But to actually, even that is a lot of luck. And like Charlie Porter, I'm sure he lucked out in a way when he did some of those amazing climbs in the 70s in these remote areas. But most of the big walls that were being done in Patagonia and Baffin, they were done with a lot of fixed ropes. That was kind of the big wall style.
Okay.
Fix, and keep coming down to the ground. But that I grew up, climbing in Yosemite, and that was the big division back in the 60s about climbing with or without fixed ropes. That was Will Robinson's big thing. It's like, no, you start from the ground, you don't have fixed ropes, and once you leave the ground, you're committed. So it's about the commitment really that we were looking for. And so I realized, there wouldn't be, there's not going to be that next level of big wall climbing in these remote ranges until there was a better shelter that you could hang at this point and survive any kind of storm. So that was my goal.
Because it's quite a niche thing to improve on. Were there any other uses that you thought that it could be used for? Was it just purely for climbing that you had in mind?
Oh yeah, just purely big wall climbing. Really, just do these multi big walls and be able to hang out in the storm. And that's basically, in Yosemite. I mean, in the 80s, people would go up, and if there was a storm, they would probably be saturated and cold and wet, and that was the fun. They probably wouldn't die in the state-of-the-art Bermici ledges that were being made at the time. They weren't going to stay dry, and they probably were going to be so cold that they were going to retreat. So, the idea was to create a shelter that was still light and easy to set up and compact, so you could actually survive and keep going. Really.
So what was the weight of that first redesign that you did?
The first one I made was for Mug Stump. He asked me to build him one for a route he was looking up to do up in Alaska. And so that one weighed, I think it was like 10 or 11 pounds, like 5 kilos. And then the fly was another 2 kilos. And that's what I realized too. It's like nobody had been making flies out of anything heavier than like just regular tent fabric. And I knew, after Half Dome, these flies were actually shredding in the wind. I knew that you had to use a heavier material for portaledge because, the conditions on a wall, you're up there basically in the sky. And you're not in the ground, the wind will always be a slower speed. But when you're up in the sky, the winds can be really furious.
You get the full force of it, yeah.
Yeah. And so I, beefed up the fly material, and I basically engineered a frame that could really withstand, not just body weight for 2 people, but you could actually put 4 people in it and bounce up and down. In fact, that's how we tested our products. If I ever built a new portaledge, I'd always test it by getting everybody in the shop. Okay, let's get everybody on this.
Let's load them in.
And then we would just bounce until something broke. Once I could see what broke, it was like, okay, let's reinforce this. And so and that's really the minimum. And I still recommend that I help a lot of people make portaledges over the years, and I always recommend build your first one, break it, and then repair it, and figure out how to make it better.
Sure. So how many iterations of the portaledge have there been, and what's the latest one?
Oh, okay. Well, probably I've thought about dozens and dozens of portaledge designs. It's sort of an obsession, I guess you could say. Making them more compact. Really, that's one thing I think that's missed in some of the modern offerings. It's like you want it to be really compact so you can just pack it away. And so I've made portaledges that you can fit in a day pack, or but basically, I've played around with dozens of designs, and I've probably pictured most of them on my website called bigwalls.net.
Okay.
But originally in the 80s, I was working on just a straight rectangular frame with block corners. And so we made 3 different sizes of that: a 1-person, a 2-person, and we made some 3-person ones and some bigger 2-person ones so you could, if you didn't mind the extra weight and extra larger pack size, you could have a little more comfort. And so
were they mainly used for kind of bigger expeditions?
Basically every pretty much 95 or more percent of all big walls that have been done since the 80s were using my design. In the 90s, it was the A5 portaledge was the portaledge that you knew you could go to Himalaya and you would survive. And so they were used for all sorts of amazing.
So you were definitely redesigning it the correct way then, if a lot of people were using them.
Yeah, and people like Silvo Caro, Hubers were using my portaledges, and
fantastic.
I could list. Basically any of the great big walls that were done in the late 80s and 90s were using the A5 because they were built to really withstand that kind of exposure.
Yeah, sure. That's incredible. Well done, you.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, and then, so I did that throughout the 90s and just kept refining them, and every refinement I would test myself. I would go somewhere with them and make sure they were the best. And if there's any way to improve them, I would take notes and get back to the shop and refine everything. But I was always looking for lightweight. So I didn't really go for all the features you might see on today's portaledges, like beer coolers and there's all sorts of extra stuff.
Well, home comforts you could slot in.
Yeah, I was just making the most efficient, sort of lightest weight possible. And so back to my climbing. And so one of the truest tests for these portaledges was in 1992. I was invited to join the Swiss expedition, the Great Triangle Tower, and so I designed a lightweight titanium portaledge that only weighed about 10 pounds, less than 5 kilos.
Sure.
It was a compact one. It was a little bit smaller, but I didn't mind curling up. And it wasn't about comfort; it was about survival. And but it was very lightweight, and we tested that on Great Triangle Tower on a 18-day climb there. They were called the Grand Voyage.
The Grand Voyage, yes. That was very brave. I presume you tested it before?
No.
You took it. You just took it straight out and tested it there and then.
The titanium one, I probably did test it in the shop, but I just felt confident that was. Mostly we're making them a bit heavier and a bit more robust, but I felt like for a trip like that, we really needed to really just be as lightweight as possible. But it was concern. It wasn't like I was that confident. We got caught in a storm about 19,000 feet, almost 600 meters. Really a fierce storm, and usually these storms on walls, the wind hits the wall and then moves upward, right? So you actually get lifted up sometimes, and we were getting slammed for 2 nights at 19,000 feet. And of course, if our ledge had failed, we would have probably perished. Really,
that'd be a different story. Yes,
you can't really retreat in those conditions, and so definitely it was. Doing some engineering calculations in my head. Am I sure of this?
So, have you got any other than the portaledge, which is, I guess, a continuous redesign and refinement of it. Have you got any other things in the pipeline that you think will be another advantage to climbing?
Oh, in the pipeline, yeah, I do have this idea for an expedition tent. When you see these campers in Everest Base Camp and you see the tents getting blown down, and I think there's a lot of room there. But I think, I could go on and on about tent design. But, it's not just portaledges that I've designed. I've designed, hooking pitons and nuts, clean climbing nuts and hammers, of course, and drill holder. So I've tinkered with a lot of different designs. But I'm a bit like a moth to the flame because making climbing gear is a tough way to make money. Especially now, I think I really feel for the small innovators today because the big companies really do have the markets wrapped up. And they did then too, but there's always niches. The niches were easier to jump into back then. But but back to portaledges, I guess, there was a 20-year gap where I didn't really think about designing too many portaledges. But in 2017, so I sold my company in North Face in 1997, and I worked for them as a senior product manager for 2 years. And I was not only in charge of the A5 line, but I was actually developing new tents for them and some waterproof packs and different things. So those were productive years, but that ended, and basically, I had to figure out something else to do. So
yeah, sure.
I actually became a river guide after that and worked in the Grand Canyon for 5 years.
Okay, yep.
But just to finish up on portaledges, then in 2017, I watched the movie Dawn Wall, and there's a scene where maybe it was in the offcuts, but there's a scene where Kevin Jorgensen is just struggling with a ledge, and this is the Cabana. This is a ledge I actually designed that went from A5 to North Face to Black Diamond, but they had added like a lot of stuff, like a spreader bar and all sorts of, they just added a lot of extra fabric that made it just more easier to tangle, I guess. I don't know, but I've never seen anybody have that much trouble. And so I thought, okay, well, that's embarrassing for me because the Cliff Cabana, that's my name for the bigger portaledge. Black Diamond's still making it 20 years after I designed it, or 22 years after it was originally designed. And that can't just be the state of the art after 22 years. There must be a better way that, there must be something better that could be done. And so I actually started climbing again a little bit with my kids because we live in Australia, and I was introducing them to rock climbing at Rapley's, which is probably the greatest crag in the world in Australia.
So that's just, is it west of Melbourne, isn't it, I think?
Yeah.
Is that right? Yeah.
Kind of northwest. And it's just a wonderful crag because there's like easy climbs that are just, 3 pitches of just incredible exposure. And then there's every level you want. That's why I love it. It's a great place where you go, you can just start climbing easy. And then by the end of a week trip, you might be back to for me, climbing 510 again and 511 even, but I just love it there. But anyway, so I met over there, and he's like, "Why don't you make portaledges again? The ones being made now are kind of crap." And so I was encouraged by that, and I just started. Oh yeah, I think I had some ideas, but I started playing with bent tubing, curved tube instead of block corners, and that opened up a whole new world of design possibilities. And I spent 3 years sort of developing new designs. I probably made about 100 portaledges at that time. I wasn't really making them to make money, but just to sort of develop the idea. So, and it's not just making a one-off. When you're making a product, it's really fun and easy to make a one-off, but to actually do the production of consistent quality, that's a challenge. Just to see if this new design could be produced, basically. And so I would make these batches of 5 or 10 portaledges at a time, and I would get them out to climbers, and a lot of climbers I knew, and I'd get feedback and evolve it. So that's my design process, is like, you got to use it And I actually did get back on a wall after 20 years with a friend of mine, Simon Mentz, and we climbed Australia's premier big wall called Ozymandias. It's a moderate route, but it was tough for the man. And and basically over a 3-year period, I came up with a whole new concept in Portaledges, which I call the Delta 2P ledge, and it's a foot out ledge. And at first, when they first made it, I wasn't really quite sure. In fact, I wasn't even sure I was going to have it as a foot out ledge. I was just making a different delta trapezoid shape. And when I realized how stable it was, so much more stable than a rectangular ledge, which can seesaw when the long side's against the wall, this delta ledge was just incredible. It was like, wow, I was surprised as anyone really when I saw how stable the design was. And it will be the future of Portaledges. Right? I don't make them anymore. I've made all my work open source, and there's 3 or 4 makers who are making my designs. Yeah. But I'm pretty confident that this design with a foot out configuration where your head's to the wall and your feet are out in the air side, 2 people side by side that way, that is the future of Portaledge design. And it's just going to be, just like ones I was making back in the 80s. It's just going to take a few years for the major manufacturers to catch up, I guess. But they will. Black Diamond just came out with a sort of a clone of my earliest D4 Portaledge with curved corners. And so, they're basically just 2 or 3 years behind. And I've offered to help them. I actually know a few people at the company, and I email them every once in a while going, if you ever want to read I'm here to help. I'm not asking for royalties. I just like to see better climbing gear for climbers.
Sure.
But they'll eventually come up with some version of it, I'm sure.
That's amazing. That's incredible that what you have given to the climbing world has opened up so many more walls and longer stays on the walls in a safe environment. That's incredible.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, as you say, it's a niche, and it's becoming more mainstream. When I saw Don Wallace, that was a huge change in public awareness of what big wall climbing is. And
they had one each, didn't they?
No,
they had one each, or it was.
I think they did, yeah. But they had 2, but they were a cameraman up there, so I think they had a team of 4 really.
Well, you saw 2 on the screen anyway. Yeah. So but yes, I'm sure the rest of the crew and everybody had them as well. So, but that's amazing. That's incredible. Well done. That's fantastic.
That's still a good ledge. That Black Diamond Cliff Combiner. It's just outdated, and probably heavy compared to what you could do. And so the curved corner design is really a more efficient way to create a hooped frame, basically. It's all open source. If any manufacturers are out there, feel free to grab my plans and start tinkering. And remember to test. Remember to break your first one.
Yes, definitely. Break it. Yes.
Not up in there.
Oh, fantastic. Oh, thanks for all that history of everything that you've done and what you've brought to climbing. It's amazing. So fascinating to hear someone talk enthusiastically about it. It's fantastic. Thank you for that.
Oh, well, thank you, Stuart. Yeah, I'm just looking at the time. Have we been speaking for 45 minutes already?
It's something like that. Well, I must say you've been speaking for about 45 minutes, and I've been saying yes and things like that. So, yeah.
One thing about big wall climbing is, it was always considered just for aid climbing all the time. But for me, big wall climbing was about really being a solid free climber and cutting loose and being fast and efficient. And right now, I think alpine big walls are probably a big focus in the mountains. But I do think that, the kind of more technical kind of Great Trango East Face walls will sort of have a renaissance. They were really, in the 90s, that was really the key. And when they do, it's the kind of skills that you need. You need to be a really well-rounded climber, I think. So it's not just about being a good A climber. It's being a good ice climber and a good free climber. And
a good mixed climber, yeah.
Yeah.